On December 11th, 2020, the streets of Cardiff became the site of an unimaginable crime. A man named Fortune Lawson, who knew how to exploit trust, lured his first victim into a meeting under false pretenses. The victim, believing this was just an ordinary interaction, had no idea that within minutes, his world would turn into a nightmare. As he stepped into Flat 5, Odette Court, he was immediately ambushed. Masked men armed with a gun and a knife overpowered him, dragging him inside before he could react. They stripped him, bound him, and began beating him brutally. But the violence wasn't just a warning. It was a prolonged, systematic method of breaking him down, physically and psychologically. For hours, the victim endured waterboarding, a torture method where water is poured over a cloth covering the face, simulating drowning. His lungs burned as he gasped for air. His heart pounded as he choked on the water, knowing that at any moment, he could be killed. Yet the men showed no mercy. This wasn't just a senseless attack. It was about money. Lawson, the ringleader, demanded a £50,000 ransom from the victim's friends. The victim, his face swollen from beatings, was forced to call them, his voice trembling as he begged them to pay. He knew that the only thing keeping him alive was his ability to convince them to transfer the money. But what he didn't know was that the nightmare was far from over. The nightmare escalates from Cardiff to Hemel Hempstead. That same night, the gang decided to move the victim out of Cardiff. They forced him into the back of an Audi Q5, his hands still bound behind his back. A blindfold was tied over his eyes as the car sped out of the city and onto the motorway. For over 2 hours, the victim was trapped in complete darkness, unable to tell where he was going, or if he would even make it out alive. But he could hear the cold, emotionless voices of his captors. They spoke casually about what they were going to do next, as if his suffering was just another day's work for them. When they finally arrived at their second location, a flat on Livingston Walk in Hemel Hempstead, the abuse intensified. The victim was dragged inside and thrown onto the floor. They waterboarded him again. They forced his head into a toilet, holding him down as he fought for breath. And then they brought out their secret weapon, a vicious attack dog. The snarls of the snapping jaws filled the air, its sharp teeth just inches from his face. The message was clear: one wrong move, and the dog would tear him apart. But what the gang didn't know was that their plan was already falling apart. While they were still waiting for the ransom, the victim's friends had already gone to the police. A specialist hostage negotiation team was already tracking their every move. And as they prepared for the ransom drop in Bristol, law enforcement was planning a raid. Armed officers stormed the Hemel Hempstead flat. The gang was caught completely off guard, and inside they found the victim, beaten, bruised, but alive. His 27-hour ordeal was finally over. Uncovering more victims, the second horror in Cardiff. But just when the police thought they had the full picture, a horrifying truth emerged. This wasn't the gang's first victim. In the very same flat in Odette Court, another man had already suffered the same fate. Through DNA evidence and victim testimonies, investigators discovered that Fortune Lawson had masterminded multiple kidnappings. The second victim had also been ambushed, stabbed, and beaten. He too had been held captive, tortured, and forced to beg for ransom money. 2 men trapped in the same location, going through the same hellish ordeal at the same time. But there was one more victim, and his case was just as brutal. A third victim, the London plot. Back in November 2018, Fortune Lawson had struck before, this time in London. He had targeted a man who had unknowingly made himself a victim. The man had posted photos of his Rolex watch and other luxury items on social media. Lawson saw an opportunity. The victim was lured into a trap, picked up in Harrow by someone he thought was a friend. But as soon as he stepped into the car, the violence began. He was slashed across the face, his eyes gouged and swollen shut. And things only got worse. He was driven to a remote house where he endured hours of beatings. Boiling water was poured over his body, his screams filling the room. The gang forced him to call his brother, demanding a £5,000 ransom. And finally, they took his Rolex and dumped him on the side of a road. Barely clinging to life, he was rushed to the hospital, where he underwent multiple surgeries. This final attack was all the police needed to bring down the gang. The ringleader and his gang, justice prevails. In Cardiff Crown Court, the case came to an end. The ringleader, Fortune Lawson, was sentenced to 30 years. His closest accomplices, Davuda Sadpour and Makaya Mali, received 19-year sentences each. The other members of the gang, including his own brother, were sentenced to between 9 and 16 years. They had thought they were untouchable, but now they would spend the next 2 decades behind bars. The road to recovery, the victim's resilience. For the victims, the scars, both physical and mental, will never fully heal. But their bravery in testifying helped bring one of the UK's most sadistic kidnappers to justice. This case serves as a grim reminder. A moment of trust can turn into a fight for survival. And sometimes the people we think we know can be our worst nightmares. But despite it all, the victims refused to stay silent. Their strength led to justice, and in the end, their courage was stronger than fear. What do you think? Now, we want to hear your thoughts. What do you think of this case? Do you think justice was fully served? Or do you believe these sentences should have been even longer? Let us know in the comments below. We read every one. And if you want more real crime stories from the UK, make sure to subscribe to Dark Britain Files and hit the notification bell so you never miss an update. This has been Dark Britain Files, uncovering the stories that refuse to be forgotten.